The squad had done a good job of quickly rebuilding following the inferno caused by the last raid, and with their stockpiles having avoided the burn of the flames, they were actually in an okay position. Of course, that just meant the universe could drag them down further, a task which it chose to start by striking down both Kaisuke and Farrell with the flu. Anna commanded them both to rest in bed until they'd recovered, intent on making sure they were fighting fit again as soon as possible. With the raids becoming as dangerous as they were, it was vital that everyone be ready to fight at a moment's notice. To this end, Anna also used her powers to fortify their immune systems, to help speed up the recovery process. After a few days of peace, the squad are starting to get suspicious about how calm things have been. No sooner than their suspicions had been aroused, however, than Jesse came running back into the fort with news that a griffin had appeared in the area. Griffins were rare and majestic creatures. They were known to be relatively unaggressive towards humans, however, if one did turn on you, you were unlikely to survive the flurry of swipes from its razor-sharp talons. The squad decided to keep their distance, but make sure to keep an eye on it, lest it decide to make itself a problem for them. That evening, a group of traders from House Soren arrived in the area, and the squad were excited to finally see some friendly faces. That excitement quickly turned to ash, however, when a group of raiders appeared right behind the traders. It was back to battle once more. With the three groups of raiders approaching from three different angles, the squad was severely outnumbered, and would need to try some underhanded tactics to swing the balance of power back in their favour. Their efforts began by sending Jesse out to start trying to pick off members of one of the groups. All three of the groups were biding their time, waiting to attack together. So if the squad could get one of the groups to break formation and attack them early, they could reduce the number of combatants they'd be forced to deal with at one time. Although he managed to land a few shots, it wasn't enough to force the group out of sync with their comrades, and soon enough all three groups started to converge for their attack. The traders had set themselves up on the north side of the fort, which meant that two of the attacking groups would likely encounter them. The captain didn't like dragging them into this, but House Soren and House Hess were old enemies, so it was somewhat out of his hands at this point. What he did regret was the next underhanded tactic they employed. As Jesse returned from his failed mission, he passed by the griffin, which had been sleeping to the north of the fort. With a few well-placed arrows, he managed to send it into a frenzy, ensuring it would attack anything it could see, including both the raiders, and, unfortunately, quite likely the traders too. It would be utter chaos, but that very chaos may allow the squad to handle smaller groups of attackers at a time, allowing them to divide and conquer. At the defences at the front of the fort, the squad are slowly whittling away at a small group of attackers, but it seems that to the north, neither the traders nor the griffin were enough to handle the attackers, and the last of the traders are being hunted down. With a fair bit more difficulty than they would have liked, the squad finally see off the first group of attackers, just in time for the next group to approach, having finished off the traders to the north. Things are looking poor. With all of their traps already spent, a large number of the second group managed to make it close enough to engage the squad in melee combat. Although it hadn't seemed to do much damage, the chaos to the north had clearly been a heavy blow to the morale of the attackers, as after seeing just a handful of their comrades hit the ground, they decide that enough is enough, and they turn tail and run. With the attackers routed, the squad takes stock of the situation. Deciding that they're definitely going to need more manpower if they want to survive this ordeal, Jesse suggests that, despite how it went with the last prisoner, they should try and capture another to convert to their cause. Finding it hard to argue that they do need more manpower, the captain captures one of the downed enemy combatants and locks them in a cell. The captain instructs the squad to patch up as many of the traders as they can. If they can save a few of them, then things might feel a little less dire. In penance for using the griffin as a pawn in their battles, he also personally tends to the griffin's wounds. Kaisuke admits to the squad that he feels that their defences are not sufficient, as he hadn't quite anticipated the size of the raids they would be facing. He suggests creating more, to help them break up any future raids into more manageable sized groups, and the rest of the squad are only too happy to agree with him. Despite his hard work patching up the griffin's injuries, it seems that the griffin wasn't fooled, and has not forgotten who was responsible for sustaining those injuries in the first place. It begins to hunt the captain, leaving the squad with no choice but to put it down. which is not an easy task and requires a lot of hit and run tactics to avoid losing any of the squad. It takes almost a whole day, but as night begins to fall, so too does the griffin. Given that it's sacrificed for their benefit, Kaisuke wanted to honour the griffin, in his own special way. With almost 2 months still to go and the raids only getting worse, the group decided to add a secondary layer to their defences. This layer will consist of 4 towers at the corners of the fortress, with a large palisade wall between each of the towers. The general thought is that it would give them a covered position with which to pepper incoming raiders with arrows, while still allowing them the chance to retreat to their primary fortifications before the raiders arrive. Of course, the new defences are a big project, and we're never going to be ready in time for the next raid. But the concept of the new defences can still be actioned, and as such, Jesse and Farrell approach the raiders' encampment and start launching arrows at them from a distance to try and thin their numbers. They do see some success, taking out 3 of the raiders and injuring more before they begin advancing on the fortress. It's a good start, but there are so many raiders it's still going to be a painful defense. Jesse and Farrell retreat back to the fortifications to join up with the rest of the squad. The raiders are close on their heels the whole way back, but thankfully the defences do their job, with Jesse and Farrell dancing in between the positions of the traps, whilst the raiders trip them all, slowing their chase. As they get back to their position in the fortifications, Kaisuke folds in behind them, looking to be the stalwart wall guarding them from the approaching attackers. With Anna helping out the rangers with a new bow she picked up, the captain and Kaisuke form the wall, bashing the raiders as they file through the narrow gap one by one. Realising that the quicker they took down the raider at the front of the pack, the less opportunity they'd have to do damage to Kaisuke, thus the longer he'd be able to hold the choke point, the rangers changed their focus from peppering the approaching attackers to threading arrows around Kaisuke to help him take down the front attacker. Inevitably though, given the number of attackers, Kaisuke is starting to feel the effects of all the hits. Anna utilises one of her new powers to stabilise him, preventing any blood loss and allowing him to stay standing for longer. Which would seem like a kindness until you realise that he still feels the pain of every hit. Now he can just take more of them. Even Kaisuke can't withstand the pain forever though, and he eventually hits the ground. Anna breaks from the defences to drag him inside, and seeing the captain fall too, the rangers rush in behind her. While Anna drags Kaisuke to the infirmary, Jesse and Farrell poke their heads out from the main gates to launch more arrows before retreating. A single raider manages to follow them back in, but with the help of Anna they manage to take him down in close quarters, as the rest of the raiders decide that they've had enough and begin to flee. This was another tough raid, but Anna and Jesse escape without injury, so whilst Anna begins tending to the others' wounds, Jesse picks his way through the battlefield and finds another candidate for them to lock in the prison and try to recruit. Unfortunately, Jesse's medical skills are not the greatest, and he isn't able to patch up the prisoner quickly enough to avoid a death by blood loss. Although it initially seemed like the squad had avoided any major injuries in the attack, Kaisuke soon developed an infection and a wound in his neck. With Anna's skills, it should be treatable, but it was vital he remain in bed until he recovered. They couldn't well amputate his neck as a final resort. Thankfully it was a few days later when the next raid approached, which had given Kaisuke plenty of time to overcome his infection. Work had also progressed on the secondary defences, so the squad took advantage of them, chipping away at the attacking forces as they approached, before relocating to the primary defences. The mixture of their river crossing and the squad's defences had split the attackers quite nicely, allowing the squad to pick off smaller groups at a time. Unfortunately, one of these smaller groups elected to stop by the fields for a bonfire, but there wasn't much that the squad could do about that at the moment. Thanks to the effect of the defences breaking up the raid into smaller groups, the squad were able to handle the rest of the attack with little difficulty. It was starting to feel like they were finally getting the upper hand against all these attackers. Further adding to their good mood is the sudden downpour that extinguishes their fields, leaving large sections still intact. Maybe the gods are finally on their side. The morale boost spurs the squad on to complete the first 2 palisade walls and begin planning out the third. Once the second line of defences is done, they'll have a whole little settlement to exist within, protecting their fields and maybe even allowing for some additional little buildings, if required. Their luck doesn't hold out forever though, and as winter approaches a cold snap sets in, destroying their crops and making life just a little bit more uncomfortable. But it's not enough to dampen their spirits, winter being cold is somewhat expected. Of course, eventually another raid appears, but the squad are going in with high hopes. Their defences have been performing well, and they've all become quite accustomed to fighting together. This time, the raiders have brought ranged weapons of their own. However, the embrasures in the squad's defences should still give them the advantage. It's not impossible for the raiders to thread some arrows through them, as they proved by tagging Anna, but it's a lot easier for the squad to shoot out from them than it is for the raiders to shoot in. At least, that's the general idea, but the raiders seem to have brought some real crack shots with them who are managing to pepper the defenders quite a lot. Farrell and Jesse retreat inside to tend to their wounds quickly before they lose too much blood, while the others stand guard outside. Unfortunately, things soon take a very bad turn, as one of the enemy rangers managed to thread an arrow right through the embrasures and strike the captain below his arm, in the weak point of his armour. This arrow rips through his entire torso sideways, causing catastrophic damage to both his lungs. He hits the ground immediately, and he doesn't get back up. Routing the rest of the attackers is easy enough, but the squad aren't ready to face the reality of the captain's death yet. They take time to patch themselves up, and no one mentions it, until it all becomes a bit too much for Anna. She drags their stockpile of silver out into the centre of the main room of the fort, and instructs Farrell to start fashioning it into a sarcophagus. The squad decide to inter him here, in the fortress that he rebuilt, surrounded by the people he died protecting. The squad hold a small ceremony to say farewell to their captain, and Anna caps off the proceedings by declaring that the fort shall be known as Fort Wraith, in honour of the captain. Anna had certainly never expected to end up as a leader, but as the highest ranking officer, she was in charge now, and she intended to do the captain proud by taking care of those in her charge. She made sure that Jesse was getting enough attention to beat his infection, and spent time with her prisoners to ensure they were being cared for too. Anna's care and compassion soon bore fruit when one of their prisoners, Chief, decided to join them in their efforts. Arriving already equipped with some heavy plate armour, Chief would be wielding a sword and standing shoulder to shoulder with Kaisuke, forming a deadly wall for any raiders who dared to get close. Under Anna's leadership, the squad proceeded with the construction of the secondary defences. Although most of the towers were only partially constructed, the walls were complete, and in concert with the inside sections of the towers that were finished, they would serve to funnel any attackers to the front of the fort, where the fortifications were the strongest. In an effort to deter attackers from setting fire to the wooden palisade walls or using the tower embrasures to their own advantage, Kaisuke suggests constructing a row of spikes around all of the exposed areas. He hopes that this wall of spikes will stop any attackers from getting close enough to light fires, or use the embrasures, by ensuring that anyone who attempts to will be cut to pieces by the spikes. Unfortunately, the squad have no time to add these additional defences before yet another group of raiders approach. But since those raiders are taking a while to figure out their plan of attack, Kaisuke and Jesse take the opportunity to have a little date, taking a walk outside the settlement. Unfortunately, the date is cut short by the approach of the raiders, so Kaisuke and Jesse rush back inside as the others begin to take up defensive positions in the nearby tower. The raiding force splits into two, with most running past the tower without taking any heavy damage. The others split off to the east, so the squad move along the palisade wall hoping to land some extra shots, but they have minimal success. With very little early damage inflicted, the squad rush through the fortress to take up positions at the forward fortifications, anticipating a tough fight. In place of the captain, Chief takes up a spot next to Kaisuke, ready to prove his value to the squad. Despite their initial fears, the raid goes as smoothly as they could hope, with the squad effectively funneling the raiders into the longswords of Kaisuke and Chief, whose heavy armour, along with a little help from Anna's magic, made sure that they stayed standing throughout the assault. The raiders were soon routed, and Anna breathed a sigh of relief, having seen off her first raid as the leader of the squad. Feeling as though all of her practice with her powers had led her to a greater understanding of them, Anna decides to try and correct some of the more egregious wounds that the squad has taken during their time here. Farrell had lost one of her lungs to an arrow from a raider, but Anna was confident she could utilise her magic to spur Farrell's body on to regrow it. The process worked, but it would require a few days in bed for Farrell. It turns out that having your lung regrow inside of you is quite painful, and honestly, just a weird sensation. The squad were making good progress on the wall of spikes around the outside of the settlement, but the raiders weren't about to wait for them to improve the defences before they decided to launch another attack. Farah was still in the infirmary, recovering from her body's decision to regrow her lung, so it would be up to the other four to hold back this raid. Thankfully, the squad were a dab hand at handling these attacks by now, and quickly fell into their positions. Along with this practiced routine, they also had all gained significant martial expertise in using their chosen weapons over the last year, so they found they could make quick work of most challengers. Of course, numbers still played a role, and Kaisuke eventually hit the ground due to his accumulated injuries. But it wasn't long after that the remaining raiders were routed, offering Anna ample opportunity to begin tending to his wounds. The raiders had set fire to a section of the palisade wall, which was a nuisance, but it also helped the squad deal with one of their problems slightly. The fire spread to the mountain of corpses they were storing, so they elected to let it eat through the corpses, whilst they protected the walls themselves. The rain soon put an end to the fire, but it did manage to eat through a goodly amount of the corpses beforehand. Although he was new, he was still part of the squad, and he also had a number of injuries, from a missing eye to a missing kidney. And as such, Chief was next in line for a blast of Anna's regenerative magic. The last days of December passed without incident. The period of calm did however allow Chief, who having converted himself felt he could make the best case for it, to convince their other prisoner to join them, and thus Val joined their ranks. With the arrival of the 4th of April, it was officially 60 days since they'd heard from the prince. The squad had been trying to temper their expectations, so as to not get too excited about the arrival of the Duke and his forces. Their estimate of 60 days travel time had been very rough, and things could always go wrong on the road. However, when they heard the sound of a large group approaching, they all felt a little surge of excitement despite themselves. Was it finally over? Were the Duke's forces here to relieve them? Sadly, it was in fact another raid, and one of quite considerable size. It looked like the squad would have to defend themselves at least once more before this ordeal was over. Taking up positions once more, they readied themselves. Just before the raiders could breach the front of the settlement though, the squad heard the undeniable trumpet call of the Duke's house. They were here! The squad merely had to survive this final raid and they'd be done with this horror. The large group of Neanderthals came barreling over the rows of defences, seemingly with little regard for their own safety. The anger at having lost so many of their number to this small bastion of stone over the last year had clearly enraged them and sent them into a frenzy. Given the number of attackers, it was inevitable that they would manage to reach the squad, and they'd be forced to engage in close quarters combat once more. But the squad were old hands at this point, and quickly and efficiently fell back into their positions as the raiders approached. There were so many that a crushing throng built up just outside the fort, but the squad's tactics kept them being able to only engage one at a time. Chief was taking a lot of punishment in the process, but Anna managed to use her powers to numb his experience of pain, just until they got through this encounter. Kaisuke even managed to lose an eye in the melee, but this only served to enrage him, allowing him to dish out even more punishment. It wasn't long before the raiders were turning tail and running, but unfortunately for them, the Duke's forces had just arrived at the entrance to the settlement, meaning that they were crushed between the squad and the Duke's forces. They never stood a chance. And so it was that the remaining members of the squad survived their ordeal. After a day to rest and recover from the attack, they packed up their food and the artifact and joined the Duke's men for the long march back to the capital to offer up the reward that cost the squad its leader. Hey guys, Tuna here. A big thank you for making it to the end of this video. And there we have it, the end of the squad's story. For now at least. I'm excited to let you know that for the next video we're actually going to go back to doing a little series. And spoiler alert, it's going to be a follow-up on the Stranded Rebels series I did. So if you want to catch up on that before the next one comes out, it's on screen now. I'm pretty stoked to be making that follow-up, and hopefully you guys are pretty stoked to see it, so be sure to subscribe if you haven't, so that you can get notified when it drops in 2 weeks. Until then, I hope life's treating you all well, and I shall see you again very shortly.